2027, we are competing with thieves, Atiku's explosive attack, subsidy promise, and the battle for Nigeria's economy. Welcome to Nigeria Wave. Before we begin, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video, share it with your friends, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest political, economic, and national news analysis. Nigeria's 2027 presidential contest may still be months away, but the political battle over the economy is already taking center stage. Former Vice-President Atiku Abubakar has fired one of his strongest verbal attacks yet against the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, declaring that the opposition is competing with thieves. The remark, delivered in a video shared on his social media platform, has injected fresh controversy into an already heated debate over the outcome of the 2023 election, the removal of fuel subsidy, the value of the naira, and the worsening cost of living crisis confronting millions of Nigerians. But beyond the political language is a much bigger question for Nigerians as the country moves closer to 2027. Can bringing back fuel subsidy genuinely reduce hardship, or would Nigeria simply be returning to an economic system that consumed enormous public resources while creating opportunities for corruption? For Atiku, the answer appears clear. He believes the government has failed to protect Nigerians from the consequences of its economic reforms, and that the removal of fuel subsidy has pushed more citizens into poverty. He is now promising that if elected president in 2027, he will restore subsidy, strengthen the naira, improve purchasing power, and make life more affordable. But his promise is already reopening one of the most difficult economic debates in Nigeria. But fuel subsidy is no longer just about the price Nigerians pay at filling station. It is about inflation, it is about transportation, it is about food prices, it is about government revenue, it is about corruption. And ultimately, it is about whether Nigerians are better off under economic reforms that promise long-term gains but has imposed severe short-term pain. Atiku's declaration that the opposition is competing with thieves represents one of his most direct attacks on the ruling party.
According to him, the alleged theft did not end with the election.
In his words, those in power allegedly stole the election before going on to steal the economy and steal everything. The statement is politically explosive because it touches on two major areas of national controversy. The first is the legitimacy of political power. The second is the management of Nigeria's economy. For opposition politics, the hardship experienced by Nigerians since the removal of fuel subsidy has created a major political opportunity. Prices have risen sharply, transportation costs have increased, food has become more expensive, the value of wages has declined, and many households have had to adjust to an economic environment in which income is no longer stretching as far as it once did. Atiku is attempting to convert his widespread frustration into a political message ahead of 2027. The argument is simple. If the reforms are supposed to make Nigerians better, why are so many Nigerians struggling to survive? That question could become one of the defining issues of the next presidential election. One of the major developments in Atiku's latest intervention is his decision to restate his position on fuel subsidy, following comments attributed to his spokesperson, Paul Ibe, suggesting that an Atiku administration could restore the subsidy before later removing it. The former vice president moved to clarify that his position had not changed. According to him, Nigeria has enough resources to care for its citizens. He also argued that the removal of subsidy has driven more Nigerians into poverty and that the welfare of citizens must remain a fundamental responsibility of government. Atiku is not merely criticizing the Tinubu administration from the outside. He's presenting an alternative policy direction. His message is that government should not measure economic success only by the amount of money entering its treasury. Instead, he argues that the real measure of a successful economy should include the purchasing power and welfare of ordinary citizens. That position is likely to resonate with Nigerians whose incomes have remained stagnant while the cost of living continues to rise. But it also raises serious questions. If subsidy is restored, How will it be funded? Will it be universal, benefiting everyone who buys petrol, or will it be targeted at low-income Nigerians and critical sectors of the economy? And how will an Atiku administration prevent the same corruption and inefficiency that made the old subsidy regime so controversial? These are questions that will require detailed answers as the campaign gathers momentum. Perhaps the strongest part of Atiku's message is his focus on purchasing power. He says he wants wages to have value again. He wants farmers to transport their produce without logistics costs, wiping out their profits. He wants families to fill their food baskets without spending nearly all their income. He wants businesses to produce, employ, and grow. And he wants the naira in the pockets of Nigerians to become more valuable. This is where the 2027 political debate could become more particularly intense. For many Nigerians, the economic policy is no longer an abstract discussion about fiscal discipline, foreign reserves, or government revenue. The real question is much simpler. What can my money buy? A worker may receive the same salary, but if food, transport, rent, and electricity have become significantly more expensive, that worker is effectively poorer. That is why the issue of purchasing power may become more politically powerful than arguments about macroeconomic reforms. An administration may point to increased government revenue or improvement in certain economic indicators, but if ordinary Nigerians do not feel relief in their daily lives, opposition politicians will continue to argue that the reforms have failed the people. Atiku appears to understand this political reality. His message is increasingly focused on the everyday experience of Nigerians: the cost of filling a vehicle, the cost of moving farm produce, the cost of feeding a family, declining value of wages, the pressures on businesses. These are the issues that could shape the mood of voters in 2027. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's position has been fundamentally different. His administration has defended the removal of fuel subsidy as a necessary economic reform. The argument of the government and many supporters of fuel subsidy removal is that Nigeria could no longer continue spending huge public resources maintaining an expensive and inefficient subsidy system. For years, fuel subsidy was one of the most controversial items in Nigeria's public finances. Supporters of removal argue that the system was vulnerable to fraud, smuggling, and other forms of abuse. They also questioned whether the benefits of a universal subsidy were actually reaching the poorest Nigerians. Critics argue that wealthy Nigerians, businesses, and even fuel smugglers could benefit from artificially cheap fuel. There was also the argument that public money spent subsidizing consumption could instead be invested in infrastructure, education, healthcare, transportation, and other critical sectors. From this perspective, the removal of subsidy was painful but necessary. The government's broader argument has been that Nigeria cannot build a sustainable economy by borrowing or spending heavily simply to keep petrol artificially cheap. This is why supporters of the reform may see Atiku's promise as politically attractive but economically risky. They are likely to ask, where will the money come from? Can Nigeria afford to restore subsidy? This is perhaps the most important economic question surrounding Atiku's promise. Nigeria is a major oil-producing country, but being an oil-producing country does not automatically mean that subsidizing petrol is financially easy. Government must consider the crude oil production, refinery capacity, fuel consumption, exchange rates, transportation costs, and the wider demands on public finances. If government spends billions of naira supporting fuel prices, that money must come from somewhere. It could come from oil revenue, it could come from taxes, it could come from borrowing, or government could reduce spending in other areas. This is why critics of subsidy restoration will argue that a promise to bring it back must come with a comprehensive financing plan. Atiku's argument, however, is based on a different principle. He believes Nigerians' wealth should translate more directly into improved welfare for citizens. That argument will appeal to many Nigerians who ask why an oil-producing country should have citizens struggling to afford fuel. It is also likely to generate strong emotional support among people who believe the economic pain of reforms has become unbearable. But a future government would still need to answer a practical question. How do you provide relief without rebuilding a system that previously became financially unsustainable and vulnerable to abuse? Atiku has also spoken about restoring targeted subsidies. That could become a critical distinction in the debate. A targeted subsidy is different from a blanket subsidy. Under a universal subsidy, everyone purchasing fuel benefits from the lower price. Under a targeted approach, government could focus support on specific groups or sectors. For example, support could potentially be directed towards public transportation, agriculture, low-income households, or strategic industries. The advantage of a targeted system is that it could reduce the amount of money government spends compared with subsidizing every litre of fuel consumed across the country. However, targeted subsidies also come with their own challenges. Nigeria has struggled with accurate data and efficient social intervention systems. Questions could arise over who qualifies, how are beneficiaries identified, how is corruption prevented, what happens when politically connected individuals attempt to hijack the system. Can the poorest Nigerians actually receive the benefits? The success or failure of targeted subsidies would therefore depend heavily on transparency, technology, accurate data, and effective institutions. Beyond fuel subsidy, Atiku has also promised to make the naira stronger and restore its value in the hands of Nigerians. This is another major issue. A stronger currency can potentially reduce the cost of imported goods and lower some inflationary pressures. Nigeria depends heavily on imports for many products and raw materials. When the naira weakens, businesses that depend on foreign exchange face higher costs. Those costs are often passed on to consumers. A stronger naira could therefore help reduce some pressures on prices. But strengthening the naira is easier said than done. A government cannot simply announce that the naira should become stronger. The value of the naira is influenced by several factors, including foreign exchange supply, exports, oil revenue, investor confidence, productivity, and demand for dollars. This means that Atiku's promise will eventually require a broader economic strategy. How will Nigeria increase production? How will exports grow? How will foreign investment be attracted? How will pressures on the foreign exchange market be reduced? How will the country earn more foreign currency outside crude oil? Until these questions are answered, the promise to strengthen the naira remains politically attractive but incomplete as an economic policy. Atiku's strongest philosophical argument is that government exists primarily to improve the welfare of citizens. That is difficult to disagree with. The question, however, is how welfare should be delivered. Should government provide direct subsidies? Should it increase wages? Should it reduce taxes? Should it provide cash transfers? Should it invest in public transportation? Should it focus on reducing inflation? How should it combine several of these measures? The subsidy debate often becomes too narrow because it focuses only on the price of petrol. But economic welfare is much broader. A Nigerian family may pay less for petrol but still struggle if food, rent, school fees and healthcare remain unaffordable. On the other hand, petrol prices may increase while incomes and public services improve enough to reduce the overall burden on households. That means the real debate should not simply be subsidy or no subsidy. The bigger question should be what economic system will give Nigerians the best quality of life. For President Tinubu and the ruling party, Atiku's latest intervention creates a serious political challenge. The government must continue defending the painful reforms while also demonstrating that Nigerians will eventually experience real benefits. Citizens can support reforms in principle, but lose confidence if the promised improvements takes too long to arrive. This is where the administration faces its biggest test ahead of 2027. It is not enough to say that the old system was unsustainable. The government must convince Nigerians that the new system is producing better results. Are jobs increasing? Is inflation coming down? Are wages gaining value? Are businesses expanding? Are farmers benefiting? Are roads improving? Is electricity becoming more reliable? Are savings from subsidy removal being translated into visible public benefits? These questions will determine how effective the government's political defense will be. Atiku and other opposition figures have an obvious opportunity. Economic hardship gives opposition politicians a powerful campaign message, but opposition politics also comes with responsibility. It is easier to identify the pain caused by a policy than to present a credible alternative. Atiku is therefore likely to face increasing demand for details. If subsidy is restored, how much will it cost? How will it be financed? Will it be temporary or permanent? What mechanism will prevent corruption? How will smuggling be controlled? How will the government balance welfare and fiscal responsibility? The closer Nigeria gets to 2027, the more voters may begin demanding specific answers rather than political promises. That could make this election one of the most policy-driven presidential contests in recent Nigerian history. At the heart of this controversy is a disagreement about what economic success really means. The Tinubu administration argues that difficult reforms are necessary to correct structural problems and place Nigeria on the stronger economic foundation. Atiku argues that an economy cannot be considered successful if ordinary Nigerians are becoming poorer. Both arguments contain important elements. Economic reforms can be necessary, but reforms must also produce benefits that Nigerians can feel. Fiscal discipline is important, but welfare is also important. Government revenue matters, but purchasing power matters too. The strength of the naira matters, but so does the amount of food a family can afford. The challenge for Nigeria is to find a balance between economic sustainability and social protection. Atiku Abubakar's declaration that the opposition is competing with thieves has certainly added fire to the political atmosphere. But his most consequential statement may not be the attack on the government. It may be his promise to restore fuel subsidy and put purchasing power back in the hands of Nigerians. That promise strikes directly at one of the greatest sources of public frustration in Nigeria today: the rising cost of living. For supporters of Atiku, it represents a commitment to put the welfare of Nigerians ahead of economic theories that have produced hardship. For critics, it raises concern about whether Nigerians can afford to return to a subsidy system that was widely criticized for corruption, inefficiency, and enormous financial costs. And for ordinary Nigerians, the debate may come down to one question: who can present the most credible plan for making life better? By 2027, voters may judge the candidates less by political slogans and more by the economic realities around them. Can they afford food? Can they afford transportation? Can businesses survive? Can farmers make profits? Can wages regain their value? Can the naira become more stable? And can Nigerians finally enjoy an economy in which national wealth is reflected in the quality of life of ordinary citizens? Thank you for watching Nigeria Wave. If you found this analysis informative, please subscribe to our channel, like this video and share it.